Hello, everyone. Ben Cena here, the co founder of High Value Author and the host of High Value Speaker Podcast. Today, me joining and my incredible conversation is going to be with Dr. April. She says she prefers just April. So, she is a clinical psychologist with focus on victimization, human sexuality, and trauma and culturally informed violence, and of course, a TEDx speaker which is a proof of her passion and her being on a mission to help as many people as she can within her lifetime. Welcome to the podcast, April.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ben.
All right, so now, Dr. April, let me jump in right away because what I want to figure out, first of all, of course, we're gonna jump into a TEDx and how it worked, but I'm wondering there must be something very interesting behind why you are so passionate about this mission of yours. Can you tell me a bit more of when did you start sharing this message with general public, with people like myself who are unaware? How long that happened and what tools did you use to start sharing that message?
Always in my work, especially since it has centered on violence and violence prevention, I've always wanted to involve community. Obviously, the people that I've worked with have been community members impacted by violence. And so there had always been opportunities since I was in college to do public speaking, usually in small forums to groups of parents, to college students, really just trying to educate them. When I was a grad student at Radford University, I assisted the peer educators program. So we would talk to sorority members, student groups, again, faculty members about one, the stats behind like violence, so like the pervasiveness in our community, two, how it impacts community, and then three, kind of what can you do to intervene. So for me, that's always been kind of community focused and community centric in my work of just taking what we've observed in our environment with our clients in our research and then bringing it back to community. So I was doing it at that small scale for quite some time.
What about the bigger scale? When did you really start to caring about your message reaching as many people as you can?
You know what? I don't think I was giving it much thought. Again, in training as an academic and as a professor, again, we hope our research has impact and reach, but I don't know if we were always trained or thought of how big it could actually be. So I think the TED Talk forum or the TEDx forum was like the first time I was really thinking of, wait, there could be bigger audiences, bigger reach, bigger impact outside of maybe the smaller community presentations I had done in the past, the local work.
This is fascinating, right? Because you're saying that not really any big events like TEDx took place before TEDx happened, right? And that probably was quite a transition to stepping on a stage like that. How was your thinking process around that? Because you probably thought that this is going to be a challenge. Why did you decide to go after it?
Absolutely. I have a colleague, Dr. Kim Gorgans, who is a neuropsychologist, forensic neuropsychologist. Actually, a few months before my TED Talk, I saw her second TED Talk in person. And again, she's this dynamic person, this dynamic speaker. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. There's no way I could possibly do that. Again, that's not the place where I ever thought would see my work is on this big stage on the internet for thousands, millions of people to see. That just wasn't in my purview. I'm more introverted. I'm more kind of thinking about direct touch points. So that wasn't something that was immediately on the forefront of my mind. She did refer my name. And so in the few months when we had some of the initial conversations about my work and what I could possibly talk about, that's when it started to become real of, oh, wait, this forum, and I've watched many TED and TEDx talks in my lifetime. This forum is so much bigger. It can have so much more impact. So early in that process is where I started to begin thinking about this.
The most, this is always fascinating, right? Because for a person who is always on a big stage, right, always speaking in conferences, might seem like a natural thing, right? And what was you think your biggest hesitation, if there were any hesitations, between before you really started to get into that process of getting on the stage, get your speech fully written, and then training and practicing and all these kind of things, did you face some hesitation? Say, well, maybe I'm not. This is not for me. Maybe somebody else is gonna do that. I'm not really sure.
Absolutely. Again, I've never envisioned myself doing this work, so I was immediately very anxious about what this could look like. Again, as a professor, I've presented at academic conferences before, so I'm comfortable in that setting. I know the tone, I know the audience, I know the expectations, but academic coming to a public audience, I don't know who's going to be in that audience. We were in a place that seated 5,000 people. So 5,000 people was sold out in that audience. People from different professions, different walks of life, different disciplines, different viewpoints. I kind of know in my academic conferences how things are going to land. I don't know what that's going to look like maybe for the greater public. And then for me, talking about some controversial and tricky topics. I'm talking about violence. I'm talking about sex education, really taboo things. So I don't know how that's going to land with the audience. So that's very intimidating, a lot of fear in that. And then I think last for me, just how do I deliver the message I want to give? Again, I'm fully committed to public safety. I'm fully committed to having safer environments for people. I'm fully committed to helping youth who are in our legal system and who have faced injustices. And so me worried about how is that going to be read and land, because I know where it lands with my students, with my colleagues, with some community members that I target and work with, but not the general public. And I think for a lot of academics who maybe do these TED Talks, again, we're not really trained in that format. So this is a different way of engaging.
Because when I was watching your talk, and now you're talking about, okay, it's not, you have to really adjust to the general public because you're not always talking to the general public. So I'm wondering, when you were creating your speech, right, and you were talking about those things many times before, right? It's just like, okay, the audience is different. Did you have to make many changes and put in a lot of work into creating that final speech, or was it just like a natural thing? You already had it, just had to make a couple of tweaks.
No, I'm so grateful for the TEDx Mile High, which is in Denver team of really helping us to craft our best message. That I had the general outline, I had the first draft of what I wanted to say. And again, I know my research, I know the clinical experiences, I know the life experience I've had, but again, getting a little bit of help of how do I deliver that to the public. So Helena Bowen and folks were really helpful in making sure I was having the best impact and power I could. And then for me, sitting down and making sure I'm not diluting my message as I'm tweaking and editing it over time, even voice and delivery, getting into a habit of practicing that. Most 12 TED Talks are 12 to 15 minutes. I don't think I've ever had to smoothly give a speech that tight in 12 to 15 minutes. I lecture for 3 hours twice a week in my classes, but it's not that polished, poised, targeted to give this one direct message to the public. So it did take a lot, and it was a new skill to develop to be able to think about the ways in which I'm using language, how powerful that could be. Me going back and watching my favorite TED Talks. So if you're like Brian Stevenson and all these prolific TED speakers, and kind of thinking about, yeah, how do I want to deliver this really important to me message to have the most impact?
It's really fascinating because I was listening to your speech and you connected the dots so well. I didn't know what to expect. When people usually talk about sexual abuse, they're usually talking about grown-ups, right? Or talking about adults and children, right? And you had a completely different angle. You had a completely different message. Were you worried about how the general public is going to receive that message any time in the process?
Of course, of course. It's a tricky message. It's a taboo message. Like you said, this is one that we don't talk about as a bigger public. And I think that was the goal in my talk and in some of the rest of my work of talking about topics with the public that we usually don't speak of. So we rarely talk about youth who engage in sexually abusive behaviors and particularly against other youth. Again, we just don't talk about that. We either send them to these carceral settings or push it aside. And so for me, yeah, how do we name it, confront it, and think about what's next and what we can do to help prevent it? We know it's a problem. I talked about kind of some of the stats and how it impacts so many. And so, what are some things that we can do as a community to address this heinous problem?
I talked to many speakers, many TED and TEDx speakers, and they're always naming different challenges that we face throughout the process, from distilling the message and having such an impactful message, have it written, and then performing that to the T, right, on stage and practicing and practicing, practicing. What was the biggest challenge for you, you think, from a moment when you said, well, I'm gonna take this challenge, to that very moment when you are on the stage, or let's say maybe after you stepped out of the stage and you're done?
I
What was the biggest challenge?
think the biggest challenge, it was one really like landing on the topic and being secure in the topic. Again, this was my life's work. And so I knew the message, I write research on this every day, all day. So I had to go for it, and getting that confidence to say, yeah, this is a really important message that people should hear. And again, having support from the TEDx Mile High team to deliver that message. And then for me, it was like the technical stuff. I think, again, if you're not a person who does public speaking for a living, again, trying to get over probably the psychology of it. So me, it was getting in my head. So again, I was getting so nervous. I was not memorizing it as quickly as I should have because I was just so worried about every word, the power of the message and all of that. I don't think I got it right all the way through until like the day before and the day of.
Why do you think you were worried? Is it because of the speech
Mm.
is such an important thing that it was for you? Or was it that something not specifically that you are talking about in that kind of format, in that, like say, in 12 to 13, 15 minutes to these kind of people and the crowd is big? What was the most worrying
Yeah, I think the format in the crowd.
format in the crowd?
Again, yeah, the format in the
Did
crowd,
you
that
feel
was a
much more
bit.
comfortable doing a 3 hour speech?
Yeah, I could do a 3 hour with my 40 people, my 100 people. That's nothing for me. I'm used to that. So some of the conferences that I've done in the past, academic conferences, yeah, I'd have 200 people. Again, I know that audience though. I know what it's like to be a student. I know what it's like to be a professor. We have these researchers. So I know my audiences. So now I have 5,000 different faces coming from all walks of life who might not be receptive to this message. All of that gets in your head. Even for a person who talks about anxiety for a living, that does get in your head. So I think that was the challenge to overcome, especially for, again, people who don't do this type of public speaking for a living.
I believe that you touch so many people because this is a subject that even me, right? I'm not from United States. I'm from a country, Lithuania. I know where you know that where
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah,
is.
yeah.
Yeah, so it's a different culture, right? But it still touched me, right? This subject that you're talking about adolescents, about teenagers who are facing these issues, and more so even the parents, right? Getting the parents involved. You're probably also a bit worried or maybe curious what the response is going to be, not just online, but 5,000 people. I didn't realize that it was
The in
5,000
person.
people. Yeah, exactly. So now I'm wondering, okay, so you delivered the speech, right? The crowd is, of course, responded with applause very positively. Did you get any response from people in person who were in that room? Maybe they came up to you and they said, well, it's a great speech. What about this? What about that? Where we're asking you questions. What was the feedback once you're out of there and you are there in person? I'm wondering about the in person feedback first.
Yeah, in person feedback was pretty positive. So, yeah, you walk off that stage, you go back to the dressing room, mom's there, and then you go out later to see the audience again. There was even an after party. So, we had all the speakers who spoke that night come out, have fun, band playing, drinks flowing. So, everybody was pretty positive of, just doing a good job and all of that. A few people, again, approaching and said, I didn't know about this topic. Some of what you said was new to me, and there are things I have to sit with.
Are
So
they
those were like
parents
some
or are
of
they educators? What do you think they are?
probably parents in that immediate. Again, don't know in those kind of quick interactions afterwards, but people connecting with the message. And some might be survivors too. And so some of the connection with the early portion of the talk, which, talked about my career journey in working with survivors. So the immediate was positive. When we were preparing the talk, again, we had a great team behind us. And one of the things they wanted us to do, again, to release that anxiety and think of our talk, was really kind of thinking about impact. Like you said, TED Talks get seen all over the globe. So, you're thinking about, again, that in-person audience or your immediate community, but people all across the globe are going to see this message. And so thinking about that impact, also thinking about what do you want from this talk? And I think you kind of alluded to that. What did you hope would come from this talk? Again, I was so nervous. I was like, I just want to do a good talk. I wasn't I
To
wasn't
make it happen
thinking.
nicely, and we want to finish it. We'll see what happens.
Yep. And we'll see what happens. I, at the time, was not thinking beyond that. Again, other people have other motives on doing their TED Talk. Maybe they have a book coming out in 6 months and things like that. I didn't have any big plans for kind of how I thought this was going to land and what I wanted from it. So it wasn't until the weeks and months after all of the things started connecting.
Okay, so let's jump in there, April, because I am wondering what happens in those weeks and months later. Because TEDx talk, of course, is published about what one month, 2 months later, right?
About a
On
month,
online.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so your
So
your talk is out
yeah.
there. What happens afterward?
So yeah, the in-person TED Talk was December 1st, 2018. I'll never forget that date. And the talk went live in January of 2019. So, the holidays went by. I don't think there was too much immediately after the talk. Again, maybe a few positive emails after the talk. But come January in that new year, my email started exploding, mostly with people who were in attendance of the talk, saying, again, I want to continue this conversation. I want to meet. I do this type of work in community. How do we continue to have some of these conversations? One of the ones that came out from that was there were individuals in the audience. Again, they didn't know the content of the talks entirely beforehand, but were from Planned Parenthood of Colorado, that were from the ACLU of Colorado. So one of the quick things that happened was they reached out to me and they said, we actually are working on a new bill to talk about comprehensive sex ed policies in Colorado, and it would include consent education. Would you come testify in front of our state legislator to get this bill passed? And I said, absolutely. So there I was, just again, a month or two later, in front of our state legislators, giving some legislative testimony on my talk, the importance of sex ed, and again, this message about consent education and comprehensive sex ed as violence prevention. Testified twice in front of the House and the Senate, and that bill got passed into law. So public schools in Colorado that deliver sex education, it's now required that it's comprehensive sex education. So the things that I talked about are now codified into law in
Did you
Colorado for public schools.
expect your speech and then your influence going that far, where you are touching the state policy?
No. Like, again, that wasn't on the forefront. It was, let me do this talk, get it done. I'm doing it in front of this audience. I wasn't thinking about the broader impact. Of course, in my work, I've talked about it because that's what my talk was about. But I didn't have any immediate tangible steps of talking to legislators about it. So to go from talk to people in the audience heard me, to listening, to now being on that stage, again, or being in front of the legislator, things changed very quickly. Like, you started to see some of those tangible benefits.
You must have received numerous requests to talk about in different places about the same exact or similar things, maybe in schools, maybe even in private kind of venues. Was it big requests like that coming to share that message even further and talk in front of a general public again and again and again?
Yeah, slowly coming out, people started sharing the talk with their friends and families. People started putting it in various curriculum for like caseworker providers, social worker providers. A nonprofit reached out to me. They do a lot of workshops for adolescents. So we started doing like 90-minute healthy relationships workshop with this adolescent group, I think twice a year. And I continued that while I lived in Colorado, and my students now picked it up and continue to
Also,
deliver it.
it was in person. In person.
Yeah, it was in person. So I'm getting to talk to teenagers a little bit more about some of the topics I brought up. So, yeah, thinking about those subsequent opportunities that were coming up to continue to talk to various crowds more, the people who weren't in the audience, the people who hadn't seen the TED Talk yet, and just continue these conversations.
Were the parents reaching out? Because I'm wondering, probably there must have been parents with questions upon questions and questions, because they are probably not have never wondered, and then now they are rushing to, I don't know, talk to their children about it, maybe asking you how to do that. What is the right way to do that? Can you consult? Can you, just give me some knowledge on how should I talk to my son? Probably the
Yeah, yeah,
son more than daughter. What was that all
yeah.
about? Did
Yeah, I
that
think
happen?
I worked with a youth athletics group. Their parents wanted to talk to me about just safety and boundaries. These kids are on a traveling sports team. How do they keep safe? How do they create boundaries with their peers, with their coaches? So I'm just giving them that information. Yes, parents reach out to me for developmentally appropriate resources on talking to your kids about body parts, safety, boundaries. So myself and colleagues, we've had to gather, a list of resources that we can kind of disseminate to parents. Like, here are some great books that are developmentally appropriate that you can learn from. We know part of the problem in this, and I think I alluded to it, is again, sex ed has been horrible in the United States. Again, don't know about Lithuania, but when I have European students in my classes, they're like, whoa, y'all are definitely way behind compared to like Europe and
It's
Canada
not
in
better
some of our
in
sex
Europe.
ed conferences.
Trust me.
Okay. But people are like, we can't even get started here. And so if the parents already didn't have appropriate sex education, how are they supposed to deliver it to their child? So being able to provide parents, caregivers with resources to, one, educate themselves because they're behind, and then educate their child.
So, would you say that you, as an academic, right, and helping students and teaching students, this kind of opened like a new audience, like almost like direct channel to talking to other kind of people, more maybe more direct? Would you say so?
Absolutely. Around the same time where I was doing my TED Talk, my university, they actually were doing a pilot program on public scholarship. We are finally talking about this as academics. People have been doing it for quite some time, but hasn't been widespread of, again, how do we get that research out into the public? Not just like some of the psychological, but that could be the person who is doing scientific research on Lyme disease and ticks. Like, how do they get their research out to the public? So I was part of that initial cohort of faculty in getting training on how to do this work to the public. So that was happening at the same time I talk. And I think both collided in just opening up this new world in space. One, doing some confidence building around it of, yes, I have things to say, and they're important, and how do I deliver it effectively to an audience, a public audience? And then thinking about different mechanisms to do that. How can I better use my social media to get out my research? Some of our research is a little dry in the way that it's written. There's all this stats language. How can I scale it down, write infographics or develop infographics to get you to nitty gritty on what you need to know about my research? Writing op-eds in the paper, doing news interviews on television about this message and other messages that I study. So all of that was coming together. And yeah, that has transformed not only my personal and professional work, but the way I teach my students, that they're going to go in all different trajectories in their work. Let's make sure we're giving it back to the community because they need to hear this.
No, April, your talk happened a long time ago, right? Well, it was about 6, 7 years almost, right?
Yeah, 2018. So yeah.
Exactly. So I'm wondering, do you still feel the effect of that talk today after these years? Are you still doing something that you were not or you didn't think that you'll ever do if this talk didn't happen?
Yeah, I think so much that I do now wouldn't have happened without part of that talk. People still watch it. Some like new people find it. Sometimes I had it in my signature line for work. So if you contacted me out of the blue, you'd see that and you're like, oh, she did a TEDx talk, and they would click on it and they're like, whoa, that's not what I contacted you for, but now you opened up something new. So having it there, new people, again, discovering it, and then again, some feedback and things like that from community, thinking about needs of parents has transformed my work. So I've collaborated with nonprofits and student groups on thinking about culturally informed sex education and thinking about where that would expand. I'm hoping here in the near future, me and my colleagues will work on some more curriculum, even guidebooks, things that parents need to know. Yes, I continue to feel the effects. It's continued to push forward my research and the work that I want to do. Again, all of this is all about like community safety. I like where we landed with the title of my TEDx talk. I truly do think sexual violence is preventable. So that is kind of the message of my work and what I want to achieve in my career.
And so moving, that was about to be my next question. Now, what is the next thing for you? Do you have another big challenge coming up anytime soon?
We have so many challenges. Again, just kind of thinking about the state of our communities across the globe, of what we want to achieve. What I've done here, I no longer live in Denver, Colorado, where the TEDx talk was. I'm now in North Carolina. And at my university, UNC Charlotte, created a violence prevention center. So I serve as director of that center. So we have a team of faculty, students, postdoc researchers, again, studying different forms of violence. And again, working with our team on having that public impact, getting our work out to the public, continuing on. I hope that people on my team do their own TED Talks one day. So thinking about how we spread some of the bigger messages of all the work that my colleagues are doing.
I really like what you just said, because just like you said, there are so many people, and there is nothing wrong with that, because I think we all have, not all, but most people who decide to do a TEDx speech, probably all of them, have some mission behind them, at least something important that is beyond the financial return. It has to be beyond the financial return. And I think you push that to a different level. But what you just said really amazes me, that you really want people within your community, within your circle, to do their own TEDx talk, so this message goes even further, right? So you're not about you pushing all the message. You want this message to be pushed, and you are just one of the pieces of a chessboard to make it go further, right?
Right. I'm not in this for fame. People sometimes are auditioning for TEDx and TED Talks for the fame, for the, well, I'm going to get out of this and I'm going to go on the public speaking tour and get the honorariums and checks and things like that. Again, that was not me. I wanted to do this talk to this audience specifically to get this message out. I wasn't anticipating anything after to continue to do similar talks. It really is thinking about how not just our professional work, some TED Talks focus on people's lived experiences, which are important and valid. How do we get those core messages across that are so important to our lives to audiences we would never interact with? Again, these talks have a global audience. And so people in other countries are seeing this talk, and I hope get some benefit from it and can continue the conversation in their communities.
No, April, I have a personal question for you, because I'm thinking I'm definitely was on that side of being that teenager, right? I remember I'm 26 years old. So I was a teenager maybe a decade ago, maybe more than that, where the part of the world where I'm from, right, the Eastern Europe part, the Mid Europe, right, I think they all have this. There is no such thing as sex education. It never was. Now they're maybe doing something about it, but it was this taboo subject where you sometimes you have a book in a bookstore, you open it, and you say, "Well, this is interesting," right?
Yeah.
This is the
Yep. Yep.
only education that you get, and you're looking for that page. Where is that part where I have to learn about this? So this being such, and so many people are completely uninformed, and I think United States is quite a few steps ahead. It's not as taboo. People are talking about that more. But I'm wondering, For the parents, to the parents, what would you say? People who are listening to this and they're saying, well, I have children. I don't know what would be the best next step. What is the best next step for them? Any part of the world, let's say, in a free world, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's talking about it. Again, sex is still so taboo and parents are hesitant, but the message of my talk is we need to talk about it so we're not getting our children in danger. I think because of time, we had to cut out a couple parts of my talk, but really thinking about, as you said, back in our days, we used to, open up the book and, read about it. You'd see a little bit of sex on television and movies. Now we have the whole internet. So our kids, when parents tell me, oh, I don't want to talk about it. Oh, I have a good kid. They're not going to do that. No, I've been on the other side. There are 8 and 10-year-olds watching pornography. There are preteens sexting each other because they're getting these messages from social media, from their friends on this is how you behave, and that might not include consent. So I'd much rather a parent talk to their 8-year-old about sex, boundaries, again, in a way that's developmentally appropriate. You might not be talking to an 8-year-old fully about intercourse, but talking about, again, boundaries and nudity and things like that, safety in a way that they can understand. But you have to talk to that 8-year-old because, again, they're getting these inaccurate messages from others about sexuality and sex. I rather a parent or a positive, healthy adult talk to them first. This is getting our kids in so much danger. Again, some of these kids, when we have the label of sex offender, which I don't use, or juvenile sex offender, which I don't use, it's sometimes kids who have a naked picture of their girlfriend on their phone and they get caught because that's possession of child pornography. They didn't know. Nobody's taught to them about it. They didn't know that was illegal. They didn't know that was inappropriate. Even the person who sent them the picture, we need to talk to them too of, hey, why are you doing this? Let's talk about the motive. You also sent this. That could be a problem too in our digital images. And so we have to talk to our kids about this. And again, I'm not a parent, but when I say our kids, I mean in the community. Like we have to address this as a community problem. We're talking about sexual violence and other forms of violence. So yeah, my message to parents is you have to talk to your kids about these issues. And then next is like, let's help you. There's all sorts of great books and resources out there. So making sure people get access to that.
What I love about your message and even beyond the talk is that you're saying that it applies to parents with children all the way from, let's say, 7, 8 year olds to
I say when they start
parents.
talking. Yeah. Yeah.
As long as we start talking, so even beyond.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can
I
plant
mean,
some
when
seeds and you start
yep.
to teach them something.
Yep. When it's bath time, we have to talk about body parts and things like that. When you have doctor's visits, this is a doctor. These are the things that doctors can and can't do. If you feel uncomfortable setting boundaries. One thing I do remember from my TED Talk about the in-person audience, I have a line in there because, again, it was coming up on the holidays. And it's something to the effect of when you go home and see family for the holidays, make sure grandma asks for a hug. I heard gasp in the audience. It was
I
like,
remember that part.
okay, yeah. There were gasps in the audience that you can't hear on the audio. And I was like, oh, this is what I'm talking about. We have to talk about boundary setting, even with family members, even with grandma.
My grandmas, and they come and you hug you and they kiss you, sometimes in the lips almost. They kiss you on both cheeks and wherever else.
And again, we know family, we know touch, we know the importance of that. But that is teaching your kids boundary setting. If you are truly uncomfortable, we have to start those boundaries early. So asking first, because we don't want our kids to grow in, well, even preteens and then teenagers, somebody forcibly come to them and hug and kiss them without them being able to set a boundary and them thinking that's normal. So that's why that line's in there. Is there are little things we can be doing to set those boundaries and establish it.
And prevent
so
it, right?
yeah, and prevent it
all the way until from 3 years old, possibly, right?
Yeah. As soon as that child starts speaking, if a child says, I'm uncomfortable, respecting that boundary and having some of that bodily autonomy. So, yeah, that doesn't seem like things that facilitate sexual violence, but it does. If a person can't set their own boundaries, it's uncomfortable to say no when a person's forcing themselves on you or wanting you to engage in behaviors you don't like. Even in consensual dating relationships. So learning those boundaries very early on is so important.
No, okay, well, I really appreciate you. I think has such a wide appeal, and I think you really delivered that, and you touched so many hearts. I had memories. I was having memories, and I was listening to your speech, and I was going back into when I was 14 years old, and I was remember this accident in the school. I was remember all these things. So I hope that even more people listen to your speech. And let's say if I am a person who is listening to this podcast and I'm wondering what is the best next step for me if I want to learn more about this. Should I reach out to you? Should I go somewhere and get some resources? What is the best way for me, maybe as a parent, as an educator? Where do I go?
Yeah. Again, people reach out to me on occasion if we need like additional consultation, especially people who work in big systems. So I often talk to schools and community centers about these issues. And so thinking about how we navigate that there. For our parents, I often say start at your local library, talking to your librarian about like some of the resources that are available. Again, there are some really great books out there. I think one that did come from a local provider was called In Case You're Curious. It was common questions that teenagers would ask when they went to the doctor about their bodies, about sex, and things like that. And so, In Case You're Curious is a great kind of resource for youth who are exploring. There's like websites like Scarletine where they can get some accurate information. There's a lot of inaccurate information on the internet. And so thinking about some of those digital resources that are out there, again, parents can seek them and kind of think about how they want to approach these topics with their child.
And what's the best platform for people to find you? Because there's going to be a lot of people who want to just reach out and see and talk to you and get that information firsthand.
Absolutely. I have a website that's simply my name, aprylalexander.com. April is spelled Apryl. And so just remember that. I have a form on there so people can fill out that form to contact me or get some additional information. That is often the easiest way.
I really
And then
like
you
it.
can see some of my other work and research on the website as well.
I really like it. Now, April, I really appreciate what you're doing. I think we are one of those rare people who we need more of, who are really purely mission driven, right? That do not go off their way for having some better, quick opportunity, but really sticking to that mission where you're on. So I really appreciate you. I really enjoyed talking to you and learning more about what's behind that message, that powerful message that I saw on a TEDx stage, of course. So I really appreciate that, and I hope you really have a great success of reaching more people than even as many people as we're reaching right now.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the talk. And again, being very introspective about what you heard and being touched by it. Again, I think part of the goal is just, again, first to continue this conversation with folks in community. And then how do we engage in action to, again, prevent this from happening and create safer societies?
Thank you, April. I really appreciate
Yep. Thank you.
it.